guys hearing me now? So let's close our eyes. Take a deep breath. Let us think all the things happened with us today, yesterday, last week. And let's get involved with this one. If we had any problem today or yesterday, then leave these things outside. Let's think in our guardian angel, in Jesus, God, and let ask them to help us tonight so we can do our best in our study, in the reading, on the lecture, and all the things we will do tonight. And then we will ask God to give His permission to start our tonight's lecture and study and meeting. All right, thank you. Okay. The reading for tonight is from the book Our Daily Bread, and the number is 92. The title is God Does Not Forsake You. And it starts saying, I have given her time to repent of her immorality, but she is unwilling. This is on John, Revelations, chapter 2, verse 21. I forgot I made some copies. I will give to you so you guys will be able to follow. One more. All right. And then this passage starts saying this way. Even though the revelation is replete with profound symbols, it does not impede our examination of some expressions compatible with our understanding, withdrawing from it appropriate lessons to amplify our spiritual progress. The mentioned verse provides us with the understanding of the generosity of the Most High with regards to the failing and affections of His transgressive children. Many people insist on the rigid and irrevocable determinations of divine origins. Nevertheless, we must recognize that the hearts that are inclined to this interpretation still cannot achieve and analyze the sublime essence of love that eliminates dark depths and causes the rebirth of a new day in the horizons of the soul. If among the judges on earth there exists fraternal providence like that of conditional liberty, would the celestial tribunal be made up of harsher and more inflexible intelligence? The house of the Father is much more generous and magnanimous than any other known in the world. To this point, in the religious mind, in its abundant granaries there are more loans and moratoriums, concession of time and resource than the most vigorous human imagination could conceive. The Almighty supplies gifts to all. Actually, it is advisable for the earthbound individual to meditate over the resources that he was conceded by the heavens for his repentance in order to readjust to the righteous path. The prisoners of the concept of an implacable justice ignore the tremendous intercession from the Almighty that manifests itself in 1,000 different ways. Therefore, all who seek his personal illumination from universal love are aware that God always provides and that it is necessary to learn how to receive. This is a beautiful message. Um, I suggest you, if you have a chance, to go there and take a look on the Bible because it's interesting how sometimes we forget how how much how big God is, how big is His love to us. And I think this message is also telling us that God is much, much more merciful than we can even imagine. And somebody mentioned another day saying that the biggest love we know is kind of from mother or a father to their children. This is the biggest one we know. And if we compare with the love from God to us, it's kind of like 0.0000001%. So, and this message comes to tell us that sometimes we do a lot of complaints. We say, oh, why this thing is happening with me? Why is not happening with my neighbor? Why my neighbor looks like so happy? And why all problems comes in my life, not on his life? So at this point, it's a way when we complain too much, it's a way to show how we how much we don't understand the love from God to us. First thing, stop complaining. Many times we did many mistakes in past lives, and God always help us. Sometimes if we deserve a punishment like this, He gives to us something like this because He knows that we are still, how can we say, giving our first steps. We are like kids yet. So, and then I think human beings still cannot achieve and analyze the sublime essence of love. In the, I think, third or fourth paragraph, it says, if the judges on earth, those that don't know what love really means, like us, not just the judges, like everybody, but sometimes they act with fraternal confidence, like conditional liberty, small penalty, or something like that. So in this message they ask, would the celestial tribunal be inflexible or not merciful compared with our judges? It's something to us to think about it. And then on the bottom it says, God supplies gifts to all. God is giving us always a second chance. And other than his huge love to us, also he gives us a guardian angel that it is with us every single day, always trying to bring us some intuition to go to the best path. And and all other things that God gave to us, our family, our friends, our intuition, our opportunities, chance that we have in our lives. The reincarnation is a new chance to start a new life, to try to be better, to try to be better than the past lives. And sometimes try to fix what we did wrong in another situation. And also, other thing I like here, it says that there is no religion, um, anyone able to measure the God's love to us. So why be fanatic? Why should we say that our religion is better than other people? Well, everybody on the earth are kind of the same level. So there is no religion better than other. What happens is we are on the religion that better fit us. It's compatible with our level of understanding, morality, and other stuff. So maybe other religion is better for that person. And we are here, so this one is better to us. But like he said, here there is no religion that is able to tell us how much God loves us and how big is His merciful to us. Thank you very much, and I would like to invite Hendrick for tonight's lecture.
Good evening, everyone. Good to see you. Please. I wanted to ask that, thank you for being here, and to ask that good spirits and Jesus and God give us the inspiration to have a good conversation tonight, which was given to us to talk about the fourth chapter of Spiritism, of the Gospel according to Spiritism, which and the first part from the first to the 17th items of the chapter. So quite a bit of knowledge and discussion from Kardec when he brought up this chapter, which is based on the saying from Jesus, "Except a man be born again, he shall not see the kingdom of God." And so this is the chapter that introduces to us the concept of reincarnation in the Gospel according to Spiritism. And as the title of the book says, the book Gospel according to Spiritism, it brings the discussion of reincarnation to the forefront, but based on parts of the Gospel of the Bible. This is one of the chapters of the Gospel according to Spiritism that also includes a few passages from a couple of different prophets, Isaiah and so on. I copied a few parts of the few excerpts from the Bible to put on the PowerPoint tonight, so we can have a nice little discussion. And hopefully it won't be too heavy, and it will enlighten us a little bit about really the Christian tradition, which evolves, which really comes from the Jewish traditions before Christ, and where the general idea of a continuing life, existed before Jesus' time. But not only that, something that's not very well known to a lot of us is that most of the Jewish people, or most of the Jewish scholars at the time, had a concept of resurrection, which was different from the concept of resurrection that was brought by what we know as the resurrection of Christ after his death. And the concept of resurrection in the Jewish traditions at the time, and not all of the different traditions, but in many of them, was based on the idea that the soul, the spirits, would be able to come back to this world. And a lot of it was still some primitive thinking about how that would happen. There were different sects or different groups that believed that when the time came that we would actually resurrect out of our own bodies, and it wasn't quite it wasn't something that in today's understanding of the world and scientific understanding of the world, you can't really accept something of that nature, where you would expect that that a soul would come back and find its body again and rebuild its body from the ashes, right? We know and we understand that the cells that make our bodies, that decompose after our death, they turn into something else, right? Nature finds a way to recycle our cells and so on and so forth. And so that concept of a soul coming back to this world, and coming back into its own body was even at that time was already already understood as quite a bit ludicrous. And I think with our understanding of science today, there's no conceivable way that would happen. However, in reading this book, I decided, I read Kardec, and he said that, he mentioned this, that Jewish people at the time believed in this concept. And I said, okay, well, are there Jewish people today that believe in this? Is this something that died out before Jesus Christ? And it turns out that that's actually, that this concept of, sometimes they use the word resurrection, sometimes reincarnation today, is actually very much alive. If you just do some basic searches on the internet, you find Kabbalahs and different and websites that reference different teachings of various rabbis talking about this need for renovation, this need for being reborn, of reincarnating, and some of them go into you come back for various reasons. But if you start reading it, there's actually a lot of it that we can see it's some of the same ideas behind why we believe and why in its foundation, Spiritism, requires an understanding and and clarifies the the need for reincarnation, right? And just to clarify, of course, I'm sure we've had different discussions about reincarnation, about the needs for reincarnation, about the goals, why do we come back, how often we come back, and so on. And that's really not necessarily this chapter, but it's good to remind ourselves of exactly what it means or exactly what we mean, right? And so the Spiritist view of reincarnation is that that our spirit, or our soul, however it's described by different religions, is in this is given a path to perfection, right? And just trying to summarize it. And so our journey out in the universe, our journey through life and through our existence as spiritual beings is that to perfect ourselves, to grow ourselves, to continually improve. And so when we understand that concept, or when we accept that that is one of the God's gifts, or I guess requirements of us, is that we grow and we grow towards a level of perfection. We realize that given the lives that we lead, given the examples of all of our parents, ancestors, and so on, that one life wouldn't be enough for us to learn everything that there is to learn about God, about God's love, about how to be better spiritual beings, and that we learn and we conclude through logical reasoning that the traditional Christian view of heaven, where this life is our one shot to make it into heaven, or to be banished from heaven entirely, is really makes our would almost completely ensure everybody's failure in this quest to become perfect spirits, or perfect souls, however we want to label it. And so as part of that, and in chapter 4 of the book, I guess this is the second book of the Spirits book, right? It's divided into 4 parts. So the second part, chapter 4, is the one that talks about the plurality of existences. And in question 166, Allan Kardec asks, how can a soul who did not reach perfection during its corporeal life complete the work of its purification, right? This idea that we, knowing that we are to be pure, we are to grow to be perfect beings, or evolved beings. He asks, before any implication of reincarnation, how can we actually reach this perfection during one life only, right? And, or I guess during its corporeal life, complete the work of its purification. So, once you've completed this life, how can you actually have completed the work of purification? And the answer from the spirits is quite clear: by submitting to the trial of a new existence, right? So there's a couple of things, right? So first off, a trial, and we discuss this planet that we're in as a planet of trials and atonements, and we've talked about this before, where we, as spiritual beings in human bodies in this planet, we are being asked, right, to improve ourselves, or to atone for something that happened before. So So this being a planet of trials and atonements, we're either here to, go through some of the pain that we've caused to others and therefore learn from that, or assuming that we've already learned everything, we're here to actually show that we've learned everything, right? So, just like going to school, it's first going through the pain of learning and going to classes and starting and studying and reading the books and taking the time to study and so on. And then in the end, you come back for your test, for your finals. And so, the answer from the spirits here is quite impressive. Even if we have done all of our atonement, if we have gone through all of the suffering that we had to endure for, just sort of to take the lesson in first, we would still have to come back for a new trial, right? Which is, it's the ways of these answers from the spirits are very interesting, because the questions are always asked in a very broad way that could be that, if the spirits weren't really paying attention, they could leave a lot open to interpretation. If it was simply, if they had answered, for example, oh, you just got to keep reincarnating, right? Sometimes we're in discussions with spiritist friends, and sometimes we have this notion that, oh, we just keep reincarnating, right? There's that whole to live, to die, to be born again, such is the law. So we kind of treat it as this perpetual cycle that we never get out of, and that really isn't the answer that's given here, and that's what I thought was very interesting of this about this answer is that really, they've assumed that based on this question that the spirit in question would have already gone through everything that he needed to go through as far as atonement. So I've made someone suffer some losses, and somehow I have to, something similar has to come back to me in a similar way for me to sort of I guess pay off is not the right word, but to show to really appreciate what sorts of problems we created for others, right? And so, when people talk about the wrath of God, and God hates, or God, God will throw his vengeance and so on. Really, there's a very these are very strong words that seem to imply very specific feelings that this creator that gave us life, and that Jesus says loves us and is all merciful, all loving. How can we equate this creator with someone who hates and someone who will take his vengeance on us because of what we have done? So, taking on these interpretations of these words that are, have obviously been translated over, from different Aramaic and Jewish and Greek words, have really, and over the last 2,000 years at least, right? These have sort of evolved in meaning. I mean, the word itself has evolved in meaning, right? Today, in every language, if we think about it, there are many words that used to mean something and now can mean something completely different. There are words that used to be acceptable to say, and it's not acceptable to say anymore. And then you take words, that in Portuguese, for example, in the Portuguese of those that stayed back in Portugal, kept a meaning, and then in Brazil they mean something completely different. Similarly in English also, there are different nouns, especially in Australian English, that would sound really bad here, and all around vice versa. Same thing, aside from accents, just really just the words having different meanings. Now imagine an evolution of these words coming from Greek, from the original text and so on, and being translated over these years, over and over, from language to other language, and still, really keeping their original meaning. It's very hard to, it would be very hard to assume that that's true, and that's why, I like the example of the words hate, God hates, or God, God will have vengeance and so on, which, because it makes it seem like God is hateful, like God is not what Jesus came to say to us, right? So when he's telling us of an all-loving God and an all-merciful God, that really can't fit with the words, hate and so on. And so with that in mind, and going into more of the chapter itself and some of the text that is in the chapter, and that Allan Kardec does a good, just a good thorough discussion of all of these passages. And I brought in a couple more just to, to really focus on this whole, does the Bible talk about reincarnation, or, is this a spiritist thing? And the Catholics and the evangelicals and so on and so forth don't like the idea, don't seem to believe that these ideas were ever even discussed in the Bible. And we think that despite that belief, because of the way that things are interpreted differently, we believe that there's plenty of discussion, or plenty of passages in the Bible that talk about spiritist topics, obviously like mediumship and so on, but in particular, and especially for tonight, reincarnation. So, does the Bible talk about reincarnation? Right? So, Moses, the times of Moses, they were, Moses being the first revelation of God's message to us. There was quite a lot going on at the time, and a lot needed to be learned about God. And that's, and through Moses we get the Ten Commandments, and we get a lot of this view of God will punish us. God hates this, or God will punish us. And it's understandable that was Moses' view of, or Moses' presentation of God to the world, because the people at the times were very rudimentary and very much had a very different sense of justice and of peace in general. And so so in Exodus, right? This is after Moses has gone down from the mount, has already brought down the commandments, and the two pieces of stone have been broken, and he's gone back to get a second copy, right? The first is recorded Xerox machine there. So he goes back, and then in this passage, it's described as this, and he passed in front of Moses. Actually, he is the Lord here, I guess. Or, I guess that would have been with a capital H. He passes in front of Moses, complaining, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation. So God is just slow to anger. He kind of has a lot of patience. He's very patient. He has a lot of patience and just slow to anger. Has a lot of love and faithfulness to us. Maintains love for thousands, right? And he forgives wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. Like, it's contradictory in itself, right? Of course. But the cool thing about this here is that, if we say, okay, we understand this breath of God, or these punishments from God, in a way that it's really, justice to atone for things that we have done, or wickedness that we have pursued, or trespassed to others, then he he's saying, well, God is not going to punish just you. You're going to punish, up to the third and fourth generation, right? And different translations will say it slightly different, where there's different understandings of, like, that where it almost says it's you, but then it skips you, and then it goes get your third or fourth generation. Now, if God is really just, right? How can God take what I do wrong, and then take my son's grandsons, or my son's great grandsons, and punish them for something that I did? That would make not a lot of sense, right? And God, as this loving creator, really, the entire world would be punished forever. There'd really be no hope to us anymore, because I'm sure my grandparents, or my great grandparents especially, were not did not have quite the same understanding of life as I did, or as I do. And I'm sure that there will be plenty left to catch up to my grandsons and granddaughters, if they come to be. So, what does that mean, right? Does it really mean, did Moses, or did the book of Exodus really mean that that it will hit these new creatures that come later? Or was it really starting to bring to light this idea that you will be back at some point in the third or fourth generation, and then you will be able to atone for what you have done. And that truly is the idea, or the understanding of Spiritism, of reincarnation. And so when a Spiritist reads this passage and doesn't just say, "Oh, this isn't just in the Old Testament." The God in the Old Testament was kind of really all over the place. Not really. This was from Moses, so there's something there, and there's something about God's justice in that allows us to see really that if we're going to assume that God is just, that He's not going to punish anybody else for what I've done, that He will actually punish, me coming back as a third generation, of whether it's my family, or somewhere, someone else around our family, or it's really bringing this idea of the cycle of reincarnation, right? But the Christian view has always been this idea of heaven or hell, and if we were to truly think of, how many of us would really be going to heaven if that's the reality, right? What does it really take to go to heaven? Then we would say, well, a lot of people are being banished to hell, right? Or to a not heavenly place. And so we find, and this passage I saw in a text from a rabbi talking about reincarnation, and they don't use the New Testament as their as part of what they read and study. But in the Old Testament, in the second book of Samuel, um, he finished his discussion on reincarnation with this sort of to make you feel to end on a positive note. I guess he said something like that. And he brings this passage here where he says, "For we will surely die and become like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Yet God does not take away a life, but he devises means so that his banished ones are not expelled from him." Or in a slightly different translation, he devises means so that the banished one will not remain an outcast, from a different translation of the Bible. So, um, here's a promise in the Old Testament saying, well, even those who are banished, even those who are not, close to God at this point, even those who are not, assigned to go on the first trip to heaven, right? They'll still get a chance, come back to come back and no longer remain an outcast, right? So when we think about the idea that we are going through this earth and through multiple lives and through growing into better spirits and going through and getting closer to what the spirits describe to us as planets of regeneration and planets where and ultimately to really angelical locations that as we get closer and closer to God, it really this is the image that was already described in the Bible to say, we're not that close to God as we want to be yet, being in a planet, being in a situation like we're in today. However, He's not taking away our life, right? Our lives are ours. We are spiritual beings. We are here to live, and this transition that we call death. It's still we will come back to have another chance to get closer to Him, and have and finally get to our trials phase, right? As the spirits point out here. So, and then we say, okay, well, you might ask, well, those two questions or those two thoughts in general are in the Old Testament, and it could be a little bit of a stretch to say, okay, well, Moses was talking about reincarnation directly when he said third, fourth generation. Makes a lot of sense to me, but it's not those words exactly that it says. So when Jesus is being asked about John, there's this passage in Luke here, which is mentioned in the chapter here, that says, "Now Herod the Tetrarch heard about all that was going on, and he was perplexed because some were saying that John had been raised from the dead, others that Elijah had appeared, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago had come back to life. But Herod said, I beheaded John. Who then is this I hear such things about? And then he tried to see." So this is one of the first passages that it links John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, to Elijah. And then later in Matthew, this is after Jesus has come back and resurrected, as we know, as it's understood by most of the Christian faith. After that, when he's talking to the disciples that had come to see him, he says that as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen, that he was back yet, until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The disciples asked him, "Why then do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first?" Because they were asking about, are you the Messiah, and so on. And Peter had earlier on talked about Jesus being the Messiah. Um, and the prophecies always said that Elijah would have to come first before the Messiah. And nobody, so nobody had seen Elijah per se. And then Jesus replied, well, and this is already at the end of history, right? Saying, to be sure, Elijah comes and I will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, or have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. And then, this is in Matthew. So this passage is in both Matthew and I think Mark, if I'm not mistaken. But this verse 13 is only in Matthew. And it says, then the disciples understood it, that he was talking to them about John the Baptist. So, clearly, so now we go back to that original definition of resurrection, right? So the Jewish people were expecting Elijah to come back, right? He had gone in a chariot of fire, I believe. They were expecting the same prophet to come back. And so this guy, John the Baptist, has come and has been decapitated, right, by Herod in the previous passage. And Jesus says, well, Elijah came, but he wasn't recognized. But as he was talking about that, Matthew writes down, and the disciples knew he was talking about John the Baptist. So once again, the idea that John was Elijah, based on all of the descriptions of the life of John from early on, couldn't have been that John all of a sudden was a resurrection, or that the spirit or the soul of the prophet Elijah had just grown into this man John the Baptist. They knew they knew his story from when he was still in his mother's womb, right? They talked about him before he was born and everything. And so this is a guy who was born from a mother, from flesh, right? From flesh came flesh, as they like to describe a lot. And yet Jesus is saying and being understood by the disciples that this was Elijah that had come back. So, if this isn't the textbook definition of reincarnation in the Bible, I don't know how much more you can actually say about whether reincarnation is mentioned in the Bible. But we can continue. There will be a few more passages here. So this one was in Matthew, was earlier, and usually Jesus liked to use this saying, "Whoever has ears, let them hear." When talking some of his parables, when they ask him about why he spoke in parables, that's one of the answers. That's the answer that he gives. Whoever has ears, let them hear. I can't tell these people the same things that I tell you because they just wouldn't be able to understand. But those who have the ears that are able to understand, let them hear. So, for all the prophets and the law prophesies until John, and if you're willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who was to come. He had already mentioned this in chapter 11, and then later in chapter 17, he talks about it again. So, this idea that, the prophet had come back. Now, obviously the prophets themselves, and Jesus especially, were all, what we would consider spirits of certainly a lot higher advancement than most of us on the earth are. But that doesn't make them unique to us in that, we have to come back, especially because we got to pay on that third and fourth generation, right? And so, this, and then this is the other point that Hendrick talks about, which is the third chapter of John, and it's very it's very nice, and he kind of dissects the entire passage here, which I won't have time to do. But he says, well, there was this Pharisee named Nicodemus, who was a member of the Jewish ruling council, so a really learned man, a man who understood all the laws, right, all of that. Came to Jesus at night and saying, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him. All of his miracles, all of the cures, etc. And Jesus replied, very truly, I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again. And that's actually the title of the chapter that we're studying, as I said before. And so, most of our Christian friends of different beliefs, they take the whole born again, and different sets, or I guess different interpretations of excuse me, Christians take this a little different. But say, well, I'm a born again Christian, right? You have to be baptized again and accept Jesus differently, and so on. And and there's this very narrow interpretation that you can be born again by saying, okay, I was wicked, or I was a sinner, but now I accept Jesus. And actually, there's nothing wrong per se in that. Actually, as we read more here, we will see how that concept itself exists in here. But it's not truly the only thing that is being said here. So this man Nicodemus, right? He again, he was a very knowledgeable man, knowledgeable of the law. But as he's talking to Jesus and he's talking about being born again, he understands that Jesus is talking about coming back as a different person. Otherwise, why would he ask, well, surely they cannot enter a second time in their mother's womb to be born? And yeah, duh. I mean, yeah, of course, there's really no way that could happen. And as we've discussed before, the whole theory of coming back, which even the Egyptians had of becoming mummies so that they could come back and have all their riches and so on. I mean, that had already been debunked at the time, and it's not accepted to this day. But he answers, very truly I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they are born of water and the Spirit. Flesh gives birth to the flesh, but the Spirit gives birth to spirit. You should not be surprised at my saying, you must be born again. The wind blows wherever it pleases, you hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. So as I said, Kardec dissects this quite a bit in here, but I mean, Jesus makes a point of making distinctions here. It's not like, well, it's really you got to be reborn as spiritually and change your ways, and that's it. He talks about flesh. He talks about water, right? Born of water. He talks about the water and the Spirit being separate, and different religions have come to interpret that as well. You just have to be washed in baptism, and that's it. Jesus didn't always talk in very superficial meanings like that, and that's why he was always saying, those who have ears let them hear, because these are complex themes even to this day. I mean, 2,000 years later, these are still complex themes that people have trouble thinking about. And so And so, Jesus is talking, replies to him. So there is this rebirth spiritually, and there is this continual reinvigoration or resurgement, reinsurgement, whatever the word is, that we have to go through to improve ourselves, on a daily basis, all of it, for improving every day, all the time. But not every the idea that there is this component of water and flesh, and if you go back to Samuel before, where he had talked about the water, we are like water that goes into the earth. Once you die, it's water that dried up onto the ground and you can't catch it anymore. The term water here definitely is talking about a body, flesh. It's talking about coming back with a different body completely. And he's still asking, how can this be, right? And he's saying, well, you are Israel's teacher, said Jesus, and you do not understand these things. Very truly tell you, we speak of what we know and we testify to what we have seen. But still you people do not accept our testimony. I have spoken to you of earthly things, and you, excuse me, and you do not believe. How then will you believe it if we speak of heavenly things? So again, attesting for, talking about messages and knowledge that would really have to come later in. Thank you. Really talking about things that we were just humanity or the Jewish people in general weren't really ready to hear at the time, just like many of his parables. And then in Isaiah, he also mentioned here, your dead men shall live, right? Will live. Lord, their bodies will rise. Let those who dwell in the dust wake up and shout for joy. Your dew is like the dew of the morning. The earth will give birth to her dead. So again, this whole idea of the Jewish, the concept of resurrection, this idea that you would come back, come back to life. But are we really going to be able to come back from the dust that he's saying here? And that's really, the only way that we come back from the dust that we left is if we come back as new dust and new cells, and so on and so forth. And I think this is the last one, and I think he talks about this, to kind of finish the thinking here. Pointing out that in Job, in verse 10 and 14, it says, "Man dies and is laid away. Indeed, he breathes his last breath. Right? And where is he?" So, where does he go? I mean, man has died and has breathed the last death. So there's the concept of, that man is not gone, right? It's just asking, where is he? So you got to assume that so the question already assumes that it's still that man already exists, or that soul is pre-existing. If a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my hard service I will wait till my change comes. And once again, that message of we know that despite this death, this man has already, the man has already died. Yet I'm waiting for my renewal, right? I'm waiting for my change to come. Again, bringing the whole idea of the pre-existence of the soul, and therefore, the birth of a new soul, of a new body with a soul that's coming from previous experiences. So lots of interesting little tidbits of the Bible in general, Old Testament, New Testament, really, attesting to the logic of reincarnation. A lot of this base, this foundation of Spiritism, that talks to us about mediumship, talks to us about reincarnation and God's love and God's natural laws. All of these being understood as natural laws, as being the natural consequence of God's love and God's justice for all of us, and it helps us understand, how God's justice can work well. How can someone be born with no legs and no arms, or somebody be born in a horrible situation, somebody be born in a cradle made of gold, and how can God be just, and so on? If we can't, if we're all created, if we're really all created equal, then, and we were to accept this only the one chance, one life, one option, what justice is this justice from this God that truly is a loving God, a merciful God. So if I think it just makes sense to see reincarnation, and it's not like it doesn't exist in the gospel, I guess. I think that's what this part of the chapter wants to show, is that this is not anything new. It's been around, and it's not just part of Asian cultures and the Indian religions and so on and so forth. It's been around since before Christianity, and and it makes sense. And it shows us how really God can truly love the creatures that He has put on this earth, despite all of our different positions to begin with, and where we are in the world today, or any other time in the existence of this world. I hope this made sense, and I thank for your attention, and I ask for God's blessing to all of us today and always. Thank you.
You know,